Hi everybody, I'm Bobby Thompson, the Chief Product and Technology Officer here at CDLLife. I'm here to talk to you about tactical solutions for common lead gen pitfalls.
I presented something like this a couple years ago at the Turning Point Summit, and last year Travis did as well. We talked about this funnel, and I think people have talked about this a lot, seen this at different presentations at conferences around. It's going to kind of set the stage for my presentation. I want to talk about a few things. So this is just an example. It's the exact same funnel we presented last year. It was one client, one example, I think, for a couple months. We're looking at saying, okay, if you get a $46 cost per lead, how do we get to a $2,300 cost per hire, right? And so if 1 in 7 leads convert to a full app, ends up being a $346 cost per full app, and it kind of works your way down the system. And what a lot of times when we've talked about these funnels, we start looking at things like this, and we say, how do we improve this? And we look at the full app, and we say, if there's a 14% conversion from lead to full app, what if we bump that up by 5%? What will that do on hires? Maybe 35%. Full app to improved, right? Bump it by 5%, what'll happen? A lot of times people ask the question, and we've done it, and say, well, where should we focus, right? And the recommendation that could come out of this is, hey, look at this, we should focus on leads to full app. You go from 14 to 19%, it's going to be the biggest bang for your buck on hires, right? But the data shows otherwise when we've tried to do this with carriers. If you were to increase full apps, for example, from 100 to 150, those additional 50 apps do not necessarily convert downstream at the same rate as the original 100. Why? If you pester drivers enough, you text them every hour, it might eventually fill out your full app, but that doesn't mean they're any more interested in your job. Nothing changed. It just gave you more information, right? Why does that matter? And it's because drivers don't follow the same funnel that we do. We always put that funnel. It's some sort of lead, full app, processing, approved, hired. That's not how drivers are thinking about your carriers. What drivers do, their interest in your job, goes through the stages of awareness, consideration, and then decision. So awareness, we're just kind of learning about your company. This could be anything from driving down the side of the road and seeing a truck, talking to a buddy of theirs, seeing an advertisement. Considerations maybe where they start to apply, but they start to think about working for you. And the decision is where they actually have to sign on the line, quit their job, and move. At no point in the driver's mindset is the full application part of their decision and their interest in you. It's just a technicality that they have to do to pull it off, right? Establishing a relationship with these drivers through advertising and a personal relationship is what needs to happen to push people through the funnel. And I'm going to kind of use this as the backdrop for talking about the lead gen pitfalls that we've seen. So let's get into those. The first one we've seen is incorrectly assuming a lead's interest in your company. When you receive leads from a vendor like CDLLife, got a few examples of different drivers here. It could be popped at any point along this timeline, right? They're not all the same. Every driver has different needs, and even leads coming from the same source fit into different kind of points along the spectrum. And recruiters often have little awareness when a lead comes in to the driver's interest, and so they treat them all as the same kind of type of, they're all the same type of lead, or at least by source they tend to treat them all as the same type of lead. But we know that not to be the case, at least in our leads. This doesn't mean the drivers with lower intent aren't worth the time. It doesn't mean that you won't eventually hire them. Interesting information from Tim earlier when he talks about how drivers keep reapplying to the same company over time, right? So it doesn't mean that they're useless. It doesn't mean that they're done. It just might mean that they don't get hired this time, or this week, or this month, right? I want to take a lesson from inbound sales. I think of recruiting as a lot like sales, or at least in the trucking world. If you research what to do with leads for people applying to you in sales, they tend to put them in 2 buckets, marketing qualified leads and sales qualified leads. Well, we tend to throw them into kind of 1 bucket. So let's talk about the 2 different ones. Marketing qualified leads, characteristics, they've expressed interest, they might not be ready to commit. Let's say a driver doesn't answer the phone when you call them. It might be because they're not really interested in talking yet. They're not far enough along in the interest spectrum, right? But there's a great opportunity for drip marketing, great opportunity for continually advertising to them, pushing the benefits of working for your company. A lot of companies that work in inbound sales, when you get these types of leads, they don't even bother reaching out to them directly. I'm not suggesting that. But they put them into marketing campaigns, and then after they click or do a few more things, they end up calling them. So you want to kind of push people from these into a sales qualified lead. And what do those mean? Those mean these people want to talk to a recruiter. If they don't answer the phone, it doesn't mean that they're not interested. It might just mean they didn't answer. I was thinking about that. Like if I got a phone call right now, say my wife's calling me right now, doesn't mean I'm not interested. I'm just giving a presentation. She might think it means I'm not interested, but so they might just not answer, right? And they might not call you back either. They might forget. They might be driving. They might have 30 missed calls. They get advertised to a lot, right? They might just kind of forget, not know your phone number, not listen to the voicemail, right? Try again, be persistent. Other stuff here, provide them with solutions to their goals, right? Understand what they're interested in, what really is going to make them move. So I like to kind of start thinking about it in terms of these types of buckets. Let's talk about how we actually solve this pitfall. First one is to define personas of the drivers applying to you and work with your lead gen providers to understand the details about the interest in your job and the behavior of that driver as it comes in. I think it could kind of take a little bit of a, maybe some blame here that maybe we haven't always given this information to people. And as we've been studying this, we realized how important it is to provide to you. So we're kind of making a concerted effort over the rest of this year and moving onward to make sure that we put whatever information we have in front of your hands when you're talking to a driver or trying to get a hold of them. As it relates to that, now once you have the information, you need to tailor your approach differently, right? Talk about the SQLs and MQLs. There might be totally different approaches you take depending on where people are at, and don't treat them all the same, right? And then the last thing is to set clear expectations. If you have drivers that are going to have a much higher likelihood to convert to be hired, let's say it's 1 in 8 drivers from some real high intent bucket, you need to score your success with those leads accordingly, right? And you need to train and monitor your recruiters as they work on those leads. You separate out to a different bucket of leads that aren't super interested, and maybe you put them in different workflows and have different recruiters working those. You need to understand the difference and understand that the expectations are different and your KPIs are different, right? And then the last thing, I've probably am a broken record to anyone I've talked to here on this one. You need to provide information back to your providers about what's working for you. Put this funnel back up here with the different colors. And what we find is that it's very different depending on the carrier and the recruiting tactics, what works best on a cost per hire. There's some people where the green ones here are the best for them. Some carriers, some of the reds, some of the teal, and some they're just really good at the ones in the yellow, right? And what tends to happen is if you move left to right, they become more expensive to produce for a provider or for a carrier. And so if you provide information back, we can tailor the experience to the right leads. You might ask, why don't you just give me the highest intent leads, right? And we could do that. But I think what's important is, kind of what I said on the last slide, is that if we're going to work on producing the highest interest leads for you, the cost will go up, right? And so what's more important is to ask the question of who's doing what to increase the interest of a driver and increase the interest of the intent, and make sure that you guys have a strategy where you're working together on that. Because there are some drivers that are never going to get to those later stages unless they talk to you. So if we don't ever send them over, never going to talk to you, and you just cut out a big chunk of leads in the industry that you could potentially hire, right? Awareness. The goal here is to introduce drivers to the benefits of working at your company. Certain actions you can do in this stage. These are brand awareness campaigns, truck wraps, ads and lead gen campaigns, social media management, sponsored content, branding strategies, right? A lot of people don't spend a lot of time here, and I understand why, because if you're looking at lead gen, cost per lead, cost per hire, you're trying to move people through the funnel, the dollars here don't necessarily always translate or obviously translate to what happens later. Working on drivers and awareness makes everything else easier, because by the time people are applying to you, they're already past this stage, right? All right, next stage is consideration. This is where a driver is thinking about your company. They might be applying to other people. They might be talking to some friends about working there. They might want to talk to a recruiter and ask some questions. So this is the point where you connect with them. You understand what they're trying to learn. This is where you explore the lanes and opportunities. You send follow-up material, things for them to understand about the benefits of working at your company. Then the decision stage. I think we've probably all applied to a job before or been talking about a job before, where we've kind of gone through all that other stuff, and then now you just have to finally make the decision, sign on the dotted line. I think Tim mentioned earlier the expense for a driver to switch to a new job. It's a big decision, right? So at this stage, they've actually often gone through all of they want to work there. They just have to pull the trigger, right? So a lot of things you need to do is advise them with the decision. You need to act quickly, and you need to follow up and confirm everything so that they don't get cold feet. It's a little too narrow to think about it in terms of one driver and one carrier. Through the driver's life cycle, they're doing this with dozens of carriers at the same time, right? And so if you think about them heading through your funnel and heading through the interest with you, it's important to understand that you're in competition with that exact same thing happening over time. Different carriers. Leads us to pitfall number 2. It's misunderstanding the components of lead intent. My first funnel, I was talking only about interest in your company. But the real formula of the intent, and we hear people talk about this all the time now, right? Everyone's higher intent leads. What is higher intent? Well, intent is the interest in a new job times the interest in your job divided by the competition. There's 3 variables. We use this in sort of our math behind the scenes to find out the right drivers for the right carriers. And there's only 3 things that you can really do to improve this. The first one is you increase their interest in your job. Second one is you increase their interest in a job. And the third one is you decrease the competition. And that's it. But it's important to understand these 3 components because you can kind of figure out with different types of leads what you need to do with each driver, right? And we can look at a few examples. Let's talk about a direct lead that's a job seeker. This is somebody who's going to a job board to apply. If you work with some sort of job board, it doesn't necessarily mean every lead from there is this, because some job boards do job alerts, email blasts, advertisement campaigns and stuff. This is somebody who actually went and searched, found a job, and applied. So what do we think we know about that driver? That's someone who has high interest in this job because they went through the list, found your job, and applied. They have high interest in a new job because they're on a job board and they're applying. But there's probably high competition. When we see people go through this experience, it's not very common that they only apply to one company, right? They're looking for a job. So what's the most important thing to focus on here? It's speed. You need to beat out the competition. I am going to show a chart here. I don't have many. So speed matters. We've done about 170,000 outbound calls this year to drivers after applies. And we found that is a 44% drop-off in the success of the objective of that call if we wait 30 minutes. Right? And there's a few reasons for that. They might be busy now. They might not be interested. There might be that they applied to 3 jobs and you're the 3rd person that called. Right? It's a 44% drop-off after 30 minutes. That's enormous. And the question I would ask if I saw this slide is, well, are they just no longer likely to answer because they're away from their phone? You know, they were at the phone, they applied, and then you called and they didn't answer. That's some of it. We'll look at it a different way. This is the percent of success, or sorry, the success per answer over time. So it goes from about 83% success for whatever objective you're trying to do. Is it just talk to them, transfer them to a carrier, get them to do something, answer a question, right? But 83% success in the first 30 minutes and drops all the way down to 70%. That's success per answer. This shows that the interest in what they were doing wanes very fast if you're looking at these types of drivers and you're not operating fast and you're not the first person getting a hold of them. Let's look at another couple leads here. Here's one. This is a directly passive advertisement. This might be a text blast, email campaign, ad on social media. What do we know about these leads? They have a high interest in this job because something caught their eye, right? There might have been some part of the ad campaign that they realized that that's what they want in a job. But they might have low interest in a new job. They weren't out searching, right? They weren't necessarily at the time in their cycle at their current carrier where they're definitely leaving, but something caught their eye, so they applied. And then the last thing is there's low competition here. These people aren't necessarily applying to 10 carriers because they just got advertised as something, were interested, and they wanted to move forward. So what's the objective here? It's to increase their interest in a job. You need to focus on understanding their timeline, what they dislike about their current job, so that you can kind of convince them that it's the time to move. But what's interesting, there's kind of a lot of overlap between some of the stuff I'm talking about and the data that Tim was showing, so I found that interesting. But, so not all drivers, as Tim said, are going to move that day or that month, right? And so this is kind of about figuring out the timeline and convincing them to move or getting back a hold of them when it matches with their timeline. Maybe they're going on vacation or they're not going to move this week, but they applied and they want to kind of stay in touch. And the last one is a match lead. I hear all the time, match leads are lower intent. I don't know that that's true. The intent's different. They applied on a match form. They didn't click your company and apply there, right? So they have a low interest in this job, but they have a high interest in a new job, a really high interest in a new job, higher than any of the other ones. These are people that we see that are most likely to get hired, just not necessarily per carrier because there's high competition, right? So they went and they said, match me to a company I'm done with who I'm working for. Okay. High competition, so what you need to do is, first thing you need to do is act fast, mentioned before, because there's competition. But you also need to build awareness about your job. If you're calling in and talking to this driver, they haven't been pitched on your company at the same level as somebody who went and sought out your company. So that's where you need to focus. Then continue with the drip marketing to remind them about the benefits. Because if they get called by 3 carriers, and they're getting messaged every 1.3 days, they're going to forget the details that they've been told. Keep pushing it into them. All right. Back to the driver timeline. By the way, what is lead gen anyway? How do we generate a lead? We don't really, we're not generating anyone. We're not making drivers. What we're doing is 2 things. We're rising the interest, back to the funnel before, we're rising the interest in your job, and we're capturing their info. It's 2 things. People tend to think about this happening in like one order, right? We do all this interest rising, and then we ask them to give their information to us about, like, to send off to a carrier, and then we're done, or then the process is over. But some drivers are willing to give their information earlier because, like, hey, I'll listen to hear more about it. But that doesn't mean that they're all the way down to the decision stage, right? So I don't think of lead generation as something that has to happen in an order. It's just 2 components. We increase the interest enough to get them to give us their information, or give you their information. And then we could kind of keep increasing that afterwards. We'll text them, remind them about the company, send them an email. Sometimes we could call them and re-explain the job to them, that sort of stuff. Think of it as 2 components. Why is that important? It's important because when you start thinking about this and what's going on with the driver, this is happening across all the different carriers that they're looking at. From from different carriers, different carriers are doing this, different lead gen providers are doing this. This is all happening at once, where everybody has got a big hose, and they're spraying these drivers trying to move them down the intent timeline. Drivers are constantly exposed to advertising, regardless of how far you are in the process. Just because they're moving along and they're getting further down the process doesn't mean that they're done. And really, even if they're working for you, doesn't mean that they're done, right? They're always getting advertised to. Which leads us to pitfall number 3. We're getting the drivers constantly exposed to the awareness campaigns, even late in your funnel. If you believe a driver is worth hiring, other people do too. Google and Facebook learn quickly who's ready to talk to recruiters and who's clicking ads. So if people start doing it, they're going to click more, right? When drivers are late in the recruiting stages, they apply to 2 more carriers. I grabbed this and updated it from Tim when we saw his slides. I'm just going back to what Tim talked about in street data. They apply to 2 more carriers when they're late in the process, right? They're constantly advertised to, they're constantly getting blasted with these hoses, and they're kind of monitoring multiple carriers at a time. We've seen in our data that 20% of our leads that result in hires apply somewhere else. Like, days later, not the same day. So if you're going like a search experience and you're kind of apply to three companies, 20% of the leads that result in a hire will apply to somewhere else like later in the funnel, right? And we're only one lead gen source, right? They're going to go do that on other places on top of that. And we actually try to do things to stop them from that. We try to pull them out of marketing and advertise your job to them. We're not going to prevent them from going to find another job. But if they're in those stages, we're like trying to limit what we're doing. And 20% of them still go apply other places and then end up getting hired at the previous place. So what does that mean? It means that the whole process needs to be fast. And you can't assume anything about somebody's interest late in the funnel that they're like definitively working for you. The driver's funnel isn't done until they're hired. And they need to make that decision at the end, and you need to hold their hand, which also probably means that you need to keep advertising to them even late in the process. There's kind of two benefits of this. One is you keep reminding them about the benefits of your company. And if they're trying to remember them, there's 6 companies they're applying to or whatever. But the second one is you're also taking up those ad spots from somebody else trying to advertise to them. And then lastly, I'm just going to mention it because it's always important, is to ensure they make it to orientation. The drop-off there is painful. We all know it. You've done a lot of work, spent a lot of money to get somebody there, and then they don't show up.
And that's what I got for you today. Thanks for coming. I think the most important thing to keep in mind is to remember what the driver's going through. They're the person you're trying to hire. You got to pay attention to their funnel, not yours.